Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Coming at you on our usual Sunday into Monday spot, recording this on Sunday night after the Knicks have played 2 games over the weekend and then a game before that I have not spoken with Jeremy yet. So we're going to have a lot to talk about because this was quite the week. Jeremy Cohen, hello, sir. How are you doing?
Hey, John, doing all right. You know, it's way too warm, as we were just discussing beforehand, but
I disagree.
But listen,
perfect.
It was great to wear shorts the last couple of days. I can't knock that. So it is what it is, right?
I have worn shorts every day, literally every day since the summer started. I have not gone a day without wearing shorts outside. The coldest I think it got was I think one morning it was in the low 40s, but I saw it was going to get up over 50. I put on shorts that day because I am that sociopath who will wear shorts until it is like well beyond acceptable to wear shorts.
I feel like there was always that one kid that I went to school with who, no matter what the temperature was, wore gym shorts. Like it happened in middle school, it happened in high school, happened in college, where it'd be 20 degrees and they'd just be out there.
No,
rocking shorts. Not that's not you.
Yeah,
but
no,
I always marveled at how they could do that. I could never in a million years.
And Andrew was talking about hoodie weather. There's been many days where I've thrown on a hoodie with a pair of shorts. It's my favorite outfit of the entire year. Hoodie, basketball shorts. Doesn't get any better than that.
You're so made for Florida when you're ready to retire. That's like the perfect Floridian attire. Oh yeah, or San Diego. Sure.
Shout out. He knows who he is. So yeah, it's been quite a week. This was a week that we spoke last week. That seems, my goodness, does that seem like a million years ago when we were just talking about 2 plain old losses, right? Two plain old losses to 2 better teams. One not really all that heartbreaking or surprising or anything. And then the Cavs game was kind of like, okay, that stunk a little bit, but you know, you live to see another day. 500 basketball team, move on. And then, I mean, I guess let's try to recap it in as succinctly as possible. So the Knicks host Atlanta at MSG for the first 20 minutes of that basketball game. Actually, 18 minutes of that basketball. Let's be precise. 18 minutes of that basketball game. They look like one of the best teams in basketball. They're doing everything right on both ends of the court. And then for the 30 minutes to follow, they look like just about the worst team in basketball. And they get blown out after being up by more than 20. And then they go into Philly to a team missing Joel Embiid and James Harden. And they again look like one of the worst teams in basketball for the better part of 38 minutes. And then some stuff happened in the fourth quarter that we will get to shortly. They pull out a win after it starts, you know, it's what's the Ghostbusters line? Dogs and cats living together, mass chaos. Yes, that's what happened in Philly on Friday night. And then, as we're recording this yesterday against Boston at home, in what was certainly a fun game. I feel badly that the final score, 15-point margin, like does not reflect that game. I mean, the Knicks were going down by around 10 a few times here and there, but like that was a close game. It was a good game. It was a fun game. And yet, I don't know how you felt, Jeremy. And we're going to get into overreactions / proper reactions in a minute. But I am curious, did you feel like they were ever going to win that game against Boston?
Not really. You know, at first it was 15-5. And I'm thinking it's early, right? Like they can still come back from this. And then it was 66-65. Somehow Knicks did a great job of catching up, and then Derek White hits the 2 to take the lead. And I'm just thinking, like, there's something about this night that just doesn't quite feel like it's going New York's way. And now, granted, we were last year on a live stream, and the Knicks were down by 25 points.
I believe that was what they were down. Yeah,
and they came back and won. But it's not that I didn't have any hope. It's more that I didn't feel like it was going to come into play this time. And the reason for that was just the the open threes. There's so many open like you close your eyes right now, you could probably see another one happening. There was something about the lack of switching up coverage that I just felt they're going to keep shooting it, and they're hot, and maybe they regress, but the opportunities they have are just too good. And unfortunately that continued, and they won by 15.
This game was 119-114. So it was a 5-point game with just over 4 minutes to go. Isaiah Hartenstein got an offensive rebound on a Brunson driving layup and made a dunk, gave a little fist pump. And I'm like, man, I was looking at the score. I'm like, 5 points. I didn't think we had any business that being a 5-point game with 4 minutes left to go. And it was. And I mean, I asked the question partially because I think myself, as I was watching, I'm like, just Boston's going to hit another shot if they need to hit another shot. And they kept, and it was literally every time they needed a basket, they got a basket because there was another breakdown. And Jeremy, you want to know what's not a fun way to spend your Sunday morning into afternoon?
What's that,
going back and rewatching every Boston 3-point attempt from that game and going back and like rewinding it, making sure I knew where everybody on the floor was and like checking to see this and that and the other thing. It did not get any better on rewatch. Let me just tell you. It's so strange because that was it was a couple of things, but the big takeaway I think that most people had is like, that was the play of a team that was just confused. And if a team is out there looking confused in game 9 of a season, after they've had 4 preseason games and after they've had a whole training camp, to look that confused, typically that's not a sign of great coaching. And we're going to get into the coach in a minute. But at the same time, I'm wondering how much credence we should be giving to the fact that it was the first game in which Mitchell Robinson was not available. Obviously, Mitch would not be the one defending those threes, but he is a backstop that provides a certain modicum of a safety net back there. So he wasn't there. And then we also, for the first time or second time, I should say, Evan Fournier not in the starting lineup. Now, that's a good thing because Evan Fournier is, as we're going to get into soon, is not good. But there were some different things going on from the norm. And that's not to give it a pass, but I am left curious after that game. Like, how are they going to look against Minnesota? How are they going to look against Brooklyn? How are they going to look against Detroit? Like, it's one game. It was a terrible game. And ultimately Boston made shots, which is like, I think what the big discourse was after the game, like how much credit did you just give Boston? So I'm kind of like, as ugly as it was, I'm on the fence about how big a deal to make this.
Well, they also were playing against the team that was 2 wins away from an NBA championship.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly a big factor where, like, Jason Tatum is an incredible player. Jaylen Brown is phenomenal. They found a way to create open opportunities, and the Knicks defensive scheme helped them, and they exploited that. That was kind of it. And they played good defense. Don't get me wrong, but the Knicks were especially hot from deep as well. So that was great that the Knicks could stay in that game, of course, but
only took 27 threes though. I do want to point that out. Like almost like a little bit more than half of the number of threes that Celtics took. Knicks obviously won this game, or not won the game, but they stayed in the game by what they did in the paint. They scored 64 points on the paint, which is an unfathomable number. And, credit to them for exploiting Boston's weakness on this night was the lack of a true center. It was just an interesting matchup.
It really was. And again, I mean, here's the thing. We predict the games every week, and I'm not saying this as rubbing it in. I'm saying it more as I have been right twice. And the week that we didn't get to go, chalk would have been me picking 1-1, which I would have done had we not had a crossover episode, which I loved and enjoyed doing with Locked On Knicks. So I only speaking for me, 4-5 kind of always felt like the obvious answer for where this team was going when you take it bit by bit. But it's so funny when you look at which teams they won against, which teams they lost against, how they lost the games they lost. And I guess you could say how they won those games, but I keep going back to a team that's just
mediocre.
average. That's well, it's average. That's the thing. Like before, I think it was before the Celtics or the Sixers game, I was looking at cleaning the glass, and the Knicks were offensively and defensively like 50th percentile here or there. Like it might have been 51st. And I think it dropped after that, after the loss to like 43rd percentile offensively. And it's just to be expected. It really is. And that's the frustrating part, because it's easy to look at this team and be like, well, why try? Right? Like if it's not going to help the ceiling, if the floor isn't where we want it to be, what's really the point? But there are other points to it. I'm sure we'll get into it, if not today, at a certain point.
Yeah,
but
no, we will.
But it's just that this is what's to be expected of a team that is very middle of the pack. They are not talented enough to be great, and they are too good to be terrible. But that also depends on the other teams. If the other teams are getting better and the Knicks do not rise in the standings and instead fall, then it's a different conversation that we are having.
I think Benji tweeted went well a little while ago when he said the record of the teams the Knicks have lost to is 35-10. They've lost to the top 4 seeds in the East, and they've lost to the 3rd seed in the West. And the teams that they have beat are the 11th, 13th, 14th, and 15th seeds in the East currently. What is going to be interesting is when they face some of these more mid-tier teams, and that's a good transition to our little bit to start the show. Did Knicks fans properly react or overreact, or I guess underreact? That could be an option, right, Andrew? Do they underreact? Although when has a Knicks fan ever underreacted at anything?
You got to read the thing correctly. It's proper react or overreact. Proper react is one word, just like overreact.
Yes, but what about underreact?
There's no such thing. If you're underreacting, you're not watching the Knicks.
I think you're making my point for me.
Yes. By the way, the Jets are 6-3. That's going to be a theme throughout this episode. Anytime you go to me.
Fantastic. That's what made the Hawks game, I think, particularly frustrating, because I think a lot of people feel that the Hawks are in that middling group, and had the Knicks actually won that game, you give them one fewer win. All of a sudden, the Hawks aren't whatever they are, 4th in the East. They're like 8th in the East, because it's early, and like every win and loss like changes your placement. So that's the one thing with that. Let's go right there. So, do you think the reaction to the loss to the Hawks on Wednesday, say that again, was an overreaction or a proper reaction? And I guess I should say the reaction by many people was, they just got to get fired.
I'm going to say proper reaction.
Okay.
But here is, I think there are a few different elements to it, right? Because yes, that was certainly one school of thought with the Tibbs part of it. But to be fair, it's not like we hadn't seen this horror movie before.
Yep.
It just keeps happening. And then the Knicks got better at point guard, and it still happens. And I can't really wrap my head around why, if it's not very much of a coaching factor. Because again, there were players on the team that built that lead up to what, 23 points? It was 23 points.
Yeah.
And then it kind of disintegrated. So again, the players are the ones playing, but there were players there on the court. I thought Brunson, nicely done. And the second unit was doing a great job. And then it just kind of fell flat, and they couldn't revive it. And DeJounte Murray was fantastic. But I will actually say I'll switch over, because I do think there's a proper reaction from the Tibbs standpoint, where it's like, again, we have evidence of this from the year prior. This keeps happening. But I will say an overreaction is on the DeJounte Murray front, specifically of I can't believe the Knicks didn't trade for DeJounte Murray. And it's not because DeJounte Murray is not talented. He certainly is. We even talked about on playback, where you asked me, did I feel like the Hawks gave too much, too little, just the right amount? And I felt like DeJounte Murray isn't the type of star that I think is worth that package. But at the same time, I don't think the Hawks overpaid for him either. I think it was a right amount. And the way I felt after that game, and I tweeted about the next day, was, it wasn't that the Knicks didn't trade for a star this offseason that's problematic. It's that the Knicks don't have a homegrown star. And there were two schools of thought that misunderstood what I was saying. The first school of thought is, why do you hate RJ Barrett? And that's not what the point was. The point was much more, look, you want a player who is a surefire, bona fide, we're not trading this guy, period.
Mhm.
When the Grizzlies, when the Timberwolves traded for Rudy Gobert, they didn't trade any of their core pieces. When the Hawks traded for DeJounte Murray, they didn't trade their core pieces. And when the Cavs traded for Donovan Mitchell, they didn't trade their core pieces, at least not the main ones like Mobley or Garland.
That's fair.
And so that, right, or Allen. And then when you see the Knicks and they're offering RJ Barrett and 2 first-round picks that are unprotected, and Emmanuel Quickley's in there too, and then there's the salary filler aspect of it, it's jarring because these teams aren't giving up their best assets. And now it feels like we're paying way too much because of how RJ Barrett is viewed, rightly or wrongly. And I just think that's the important part. And the second part was the quote unquote homegrown. It's not, I need this emotional appeal of the Knicks to draft a guy. No, it's draft a guy who's so good and on a cheap contract that you can afford to build around him and take the level of risks that a team like the Wolves could have taken with Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, that the Hawks could have taken with Trae Young, that the Cavs could have taken again with Garland, Mobley, or Allen. The Knicks aren't at that point. And that's what kind of irks me, where it's just, you want to get a star in the building, but you need to also cover yourself. And the Knicks aren't at that point where they can cover themselves with ease. So it hurt to see DeJounte Murray just pop off. He had a fantastic game, especially defensively.
We should know that was a career high.
Yes, he was phenomenal.
That's incredible. No, but I'm supporting your point because what like DeJounte Murray, like dropping mid-range dimes and like this and that, or not mid-range, basically hitting everything and doing that from 3. Like maybe this is the new DeJounte Murray, and maybe we're going to see him exceed this career high 5 or 6 times this year. This is a different animal from Donovan Mitchell, as far as I'm concerned. I just want that noted for the record. So good point there. I'm not losing any sleep over the fact that I didn't trade for Murray, although I think he's excellent. I think. So here's what I want to say, and this will kind of bleed into the win, overreaction / proper reactions to the win on Friday. I think where I come off very differently. It's funny, for all that we've talked about Tibbs over the last year and change, I don't know if I've ever made this specific point, and it is this. I think there is an inherent just an inherent negativity when you fire a coach in the NBA. Makes the organization look bad. I don't think there's any way around it. I think it makes the organization look bad. I think, there are times where it's time to move on. And we see those times where it is time to move on, where a guy has clearly gotten his shot, where he's clearly gotten his runway, and it didn't work out. And I think there are other times where a guy maybe gets hired and it is very clear that it's not the right guy. And oftentimes those guys don't get hired again. I think David Fizdale, you could argue, probably falls into this camp. But when you have a coach who is not definitely a terrible coach, certainly not definitely a great coach, he's somewhere in between, and like things are moving along and people are complaining about stuff. And then there's other people who are like, well, but he has these roster issues and like all the things that I typically say on here. Like that's a more neutral situation. And I think to fire a coach like that after 8 games, or no, I guess it would have been after 7 games, right? Because it was we're talking about after the Hawks game. Not a great look for your organization. And it's a sign of instability. And if just for argument's sake, they would have fired him after that Hawks game, they would have been the laughing stock of the NBA. And and Knicks fans will have their opinions about like, oh, of course, because we're always going to be the laughing stock of the NBA. So LOL Knicks, they'll look for any reason to make fun of us. Well, maybe not. I just don't think it would have been a good look. Now, I'm the same person who tweeted out during the Philly game, entering the 4th quarter, if they don't come back and win this game, you could start the clock ticking on Tibbs's, whatever you want to say, job standing with this team. Because I think if they had lost that game with the rest of the schedule coming up and with the stars that Philly had out, it would have been fair to start looking ahead to, well, if this thing is 6-5 15 or 6-16 or 6-18 or 7-19, at that point, okay, we've come far enough. The wheels have fallen off. Let's go in a different direction. The notion of firing a coach after 7 games, though, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't get behind it in this circumstance. Not after one, albeit very bad game. Can't do it. So I think that was an overreaction.
I didn't think Tibbs was going to get fired after the 7th game. I also didn't think he was going to get fired after the 8th or even the 9th, depending on even if it were losses. I don't see it the same way in terms of, yes, if you fire a coach, it's not a good look, 100%. But you also don't have to stick with someone if you know that it's not going the right direction, right? Like,
for sure,
this is not a 1-to-1 comparison, right? When Fizdale was fired, it was like, you have to get rid of him, right? You got to do it. Tibbs is no Fizdale. Tibbs is a far better coach than Fizdale. But with that said, what you were describing, it actually kind of reminded me of what I've pointed out that bothers me with Tibbs' coaching philosophy, which is when there is a lead and then the other team catches up and then the other team takes the lead and then Tibbs calls timeout to try to regroup. Yep. Because you're saying like, oh, if it gets really, really bad, that's when you say, hey, let's huddle in, let's change things up, let's move things out the door and whatnot. And it's just like at that point, it feels like a lost season. And it doesn't have to be, right? I mean, baseball is very different from basketball, but we just saw the Phillies make it to Game 6 of the World Series and they fired Joe Girardi, and Rob Thompson did a great job of navigating them to the finals. Again, baseball and basketball, totally different sports, totally different in terms of how stars can get you to where you need to be. But it's the thought of, it almost feels like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And you had the opportunity to go on the putback this week, and I thought you did a great job. One of the things that, of course, got clipped was when you were talking about the ceiling of the players with Tibbs. And the way I was seeing it was, what's that?
Which drove people up a wall.
Well, the way I saw it was, it's like, yes, you could say that, but to me, if you remove Tibbs from the equation, you could find a way to argue that, and I don't think it'd be a pretty difficult argument to make, that putting the younger players in a better position to succeed, for whether it's Johnny Bryan or whomever is taking over, inherently raises these players' values. And if that's the case and you're raising their values, you're making them more attractive in trade. And we know that the Knicks are likely going to target a star via the trade market. So if you're putting your talent in a better position to thrive, then to me, it says we are investing in our future. We are investing in our ceiling. It's just not, hey, we're going to turn players who maybe don't project to be stars into these stars that are then, and I think propel the Knicks down the line.
And I think that's what the Tibbs conversation ultimately comes down to, because the people who are more in favor of getting Tibbs out of here sooner rather than later, I think the Venn diagram is almost overlapping with the group of people who think that there is some really special, potentially special young talent on this team. And I don't agree with that. I think the young talent is fine, just like many other teams in the league have perfectly fine young talent, but flawed young talent. And the cream rises. I've said this a few times now recently. The cream rises to the top. And it's like, you look at the guys on this team, the young players on this team, throw RJ Barrett in that conversation if you want to. They're what they are. They're nice players. I think they have a chance to be good, really helpful rotation pieces for a long time. Barrett has a chance to be something better than that. Obi's the one question mark, because, like, again, what would he look like in a certain system with a certain amount of minutes a night? If you want to just get a coach to run these guys out there for 30 minutes a night and stick Evan Fournier, well, Evan Fournier is going to be stuck on the bench regardless pretty soon, as we'll get to shortly. But like, I don't know. But that gets back to like the organizational stuff. Like, it's an organizational decision if you're going to like mothball some of these veterans. So I don't know.
Sure. On the Tibbs front, before we go to the next game, I'm just curious. I saw you mentioned on Twitter, as you were roped into all these conversations, and sorry, you had to deal with that. But you talked about the systemic issues that are plaguing the franchise, right?
The roster, not the franchise, the roster.
Right. But And in this context, you're saying, well, because the front office signed and acquired these players and Tibbs is the one dealing with them, that, like he can only do so much, right? That's what you were getting at. So what I want to talk about was how many of the players, and we can go through them, the players on the team, do you think Tibbs did not have a significant say and support them on? Because
for sure.
I watched, Andrew's going to love this. I rewatched Draft Day last night. Vontae Mack, no matter what, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that really spoke to me was when Sonny Weaver Jr. talks to Penn and says, my job is to get the players that I think are going to best fit the team. And your job is to coach those players on that team. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the point. And it kind of overlaps with the thought process of that doesn't seem to be the case in New York. It seems like there is far more synergy between Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau in terms of the players that are there, right? Like it's not Leon Rose saying, hey, I'm just going to get you some centers and you're going to deal with it. It's okay. You like rim protectors at the 5, you like 48 minutes rim protection. We're going to do what we can to support that. And I was going through the whole roster and I was trying to figure out who Tibbs really would not have signed off on. And there aren't a lot of players. It seems like his fingerprints are very much on this team from a lot of the intel.
I mean, do we really need to? We know we wanted Bullock back. We know we didn't want Kemba Walker.
I'm talking about the players on this team right now.
Players on the team right now. I don't have any idea what we should think we know about whether Tibbs wanted to trade Julius Randle in the offseason. I don't get the sense that there's any love lost between the two of them. Right.
I mean, granted, again, I know what you're saying about Kemba Walker. I'm trying not to then say ignore that and then go to Julius. I would be shocked if Tibbs did not want Julius back, especially after that season. And I'm sure last season frustrated the hell out of Tibbs, which is why, Tibbs would have preferred to have moved him. But also, judging by the amount of minutes that Tibbs was giving Julius versus giving Obi, I feel like it's an indication.
Last night.
Right. But it took a Mitchell Robinson injury for us to see more of Obi Toppin.
Yeah.
As it usually does, where it's okay, I have to play Obi Toppin because of circumstances. And, obviously Tibbs would have wanted Jalen Brunson here. He's close with Rick. He's known Jalen Brunson for a long time. RJ, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, because I think he loves the fact that RJ is here. And yet at the same time, it's interesting still to me that he's made comments in consecutive years about RJ spending time in the gym.
Very interesting to me.
I think he certainly wanted Mitchell Robinson back because I didn't think that the Knicks had a great opportunity to replace Mitch based on free agency. And they certainly could have gone with a rookie center in the draft, but they didn't want to. And the real head scratchers for me, right, were number one was Cam Reddish. And I still think that last year it was more about Tibbs saying, I trust my veterans more than I trust Cam Reddish. Not that I don't trust Cam Reddish, period. And then it's Evan Fournier. And I thought, Tibbs, he wanted Bullock back, but he definitely didn't want Fournier. But then looking back, Berman wrote in March that Tibbs was supportive of the Fournier signing.
I think he was okay with it.
Right. So, But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look at, it's called 11 guys, right? Because I think the fringe players, rotation wise, of McBride, Sims, Arcidiacono, and McCulloch they're out of the picture. Of the 11 players on the roster, I don't know how many of them Tibbs really wouldn't have wanted on the team.
Jeremy, the fact that we're having a discussion about whether Tibbs was right or wrong in the players that he wanted on this team is indicative of a front office decision to get this guy's opinion, but that's not be involved.
But that's not my point. My point is,
I'm missing the point.
My point is, if you're saying he's a victim of systemic failure, but he is in himself part of the system, it doesn't compute for me.
Let me be much more clear. I think the systemic failure is on Julius. It's Julius. I think that's the systemic failure. I think Julius Randle is the systemic failure. And I think that is why I brought up the Julius thing and the reason why I brought up the Kemba thing is because I think the singular systemic failure of last season's team was the acquisition of Kemba Walker. And that is absolutely something that Tom Thibodeau wanted no part of. So if you boil it down, if you boil all of it down to those two players, and Fournier's been big minus too, but I think the Fournier thing has kind of gone sideways as other like players have emerged, and as Fournier's confidence, quite frankly, is in the shitter because he looks like a guy who like doesn't even belong on a basketball court right now. Like he didn't look that way last year all the time. And we've seen him play a functional role on good teams. It's like, what we're seeing now is like, that's a different animal. So yeah, I don't, but
that's what I don't get, right? Like, yes, if you're saying that Julius being here as a result of the front office re-signing him or extending him is a failure, then sure. But then why is it that Julius still continues to see as many minutes at the 4 as he does? And why is it that it only took Mitch going down for Obi to then get that opportunity? And whereas Evan Fournier sees his minutes plummet, and I just don't know why it can't be the same.
And that's been my biggest issue with Tibbs. Going back to last year, as you know this, I've not been bashful about it. And the only answer that we jointly always go back to is the contract. It's a $100 million extension that is just kicking in this year. And what are the realities and ramifications of that when you are trying to deal with what could potentially become, if it is not already, the biggest albatross in the NBA? That's what happens when you lose that guy. I've said this before many times. What happens when you lose that guy? What happens when you mentally lose that guy? And I don't know what the answer is. Because I watch, again, going back to Saturday night, I watched that game tape, and I don't know who somehow managed to find himself in a whole lot of those confused switches, and who managed to not get out on a whole lot of threes where he was the guy who was supposed to get out on them. And he either chose not to, or he had his head somewhere other than in the play where he couldn't get out fast enough. I think he's already, and if you look at how he's kind of, his offense has kind of fluctuated in terms of how he's been, moderating himself, shall we say, over the last several games after a nice start. I'm wondering if it's already heading south. And, clearly Tibbs has done a very poor job figuring out how to continue to reach this player amidst a downturn in shooting, overall play, the whole thing. It's been the biggest knock on his tenure, in my opinion, by far. Absolutely deserves all the criticism in the world that comes his way for the Randall thing. Everything has to do with Randall. I just don't envy the spot that he's in. If that, to me, is the biggest issue, it's, you got to not believe in the coach to fire him. And that's where I differ from most people, is I don't think you could look at him at this point and be like, nah, he's shown us enough, not enough to believe in. But I'm in the minority.
So what changes do you recommend, right? If your option is not just get rid of him, what is the way that you, if you are in this position, or that you have control over it, what are you doing?
This gets us to the Philly game, because I do think if he continued to make rotation decisions in a certain way in terms of minutes and things, not regardless of the results, because it's never regardless of the results, but like the rotation decisions going the way they were going, I would have said, yeah, absolutely, send him on his way, because you can't have a team where you're playing, Cam Reddish, these piddly number of minutes and like so on and so forth. I think that we're seeing that starting to change. And that's why, in that sense, I don't think the reaction to the win in Philly was an overreaction, because of several of the things that we saw. And I think should give us some hope moving forward that we'll continue to see those things.
I thought the win as well was a proper reaction, but it's just, the struggle was, it goes hand in hand with the Knicks are beating bad teams and they are losing to good teams, and Philly without James Harden and Joel Embiid, they kind of feel like a middle of the pack, maybe slightly below that.
Bad.
Yeah. Probably.
The Knicks were
too
awful
kind.
for
They're
3
not good.
quarters.
Yeah. And the Knicks certainly took advantage of that. And I'm not going to, bemoan the fact that the Sixers are playing without their 2 best players, because the Knicks got the win. I think what was concerning was, the process in itself seemed better than we'd seen in other games. It just worried. It was like, oh, even without these 2 stars, the Knicks are still finding a way to maybe eke out a win. And then they did. And they won. That's the important part. They won the game, but it was just like, you're coming off of an off day. And mind you were also the previous game, you were off of 2 off days, and then you got your doors blown in at the end of the second quarter through the rest of the game. Where was that fire that Jeremy, you would have had? And it wasn't
too kind.
I know I am. I'm absolutely being too kind.
You're being way too kind. That was a dog shit performance.
I know.
And that's why I tweeted his job's security needs to be in question if they don't come back and win this game. Andrew, you want to jump in?
Yeah, can I jump in? First of all, the Jets are 6-3. Second of all, the difference in the reaction to Wednesday's game and the reaction to Friday's game, as far as it pertains to Thibodeau, I don't know if you feel the same way, Jeremy. You and I, we have been the driving force of pushback toward Jon, you more than me, because you are on mic more, as far as criticism of Tibbs. The bigger issues we had, and I hope I'm not speaking for you too much, but I think you'll agree, is that we knew every single rotation and lineup we were going to see on Wednesday. Yep. And we knew when people were going to come out. We had a feeling we knew when people were going to come back in. We said it on playback. I guarantee when he comes out of this timeout in the third quarter, the exact same 5 are on the floor. And it went exactly how we saw it. And Friday, the reason why it was a different reaction was I saw lineups I never thought I'd see Tom Thibodeau try. He tried everything. So to your point, Jon, I actually would say, regardless of the result, if Tyrese Maxey had hit a 3 to win 107-106, I would have been crushed and been like, damn. But my reaction would have been like, all right, Tibbs actually did try literally everything. We saw Obi and Randall play together. We saw Derrick Rose play like 7 minutes. We saw very limited Fournier. We saw Cam Reddish play the last 7 minutes of each half and no other minutes of the game. Like, we saw him try multiple different combinations in this game, which I think is what all people have asked. Just, I don't need you to force feed us Evan Fournier or this same 5. And we're getting a different look at different combinations on this team.
What you're getting at is, with every coach, at some point you have to ask, can we win? Can we win with this guy? / is he the reason we are not winning? I think Thibodeau has shown you enough in the NBA to say you can win with Thibodeau. I don't know if you could win with this roster at the level that they want to win, but then again, no one would win with this roster at the level that they want to win.
Well, we don't know.
I think the more interesting. What did you say?
We don't know.
Well, that's a difference of opinion, but
I understand. I hear you, but the way you're stating it is not opinionated. The way you're stating is fact. And I'm just saying
that is my opinion. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. The other part is more interesting to me, which is this coach part of the reason that we're losing? And I think, to your point, Andrew, about the always knowing the substitutions or not lack of substitutions during these timeouts, that was a reason why they were losing. And we saw it time and time again last year. And what they would go to in the fourth quarter, and it would never work. And the lack of experimentation, because he was so stubbornly of the belief that, like, no, eventually it's going to work. Eventually it's going to work. Well, guess what, Tom? It never worked. It's why you could say last season was arguably the worst season of his coaching career, putting aside the whole Jimmy Butler fiasco. On board with all that, I think he deserved a shot this year to redeem himself. I did not think that shot was going well over the first 7 games. And I think, but even so, I think you deserve more than 7. And that's where I'm landing. And I think game 8 was a step in the right direction. Game 9 against Boston was,
I think, another step in the right direction, guys. I don't know if you felt this way, Jeremy, but
you could argue both ways.
The switching is a problem, but you got guys that have not played together.
Yeah, but guys should
playing together.
But there were guys who had played together, who have been at the very least on the roster and playing in the same unit together since the beginning of training camp. At the very least,
the quickly Brunson switching, like what you and Benji and Piccolo and all the different people putting up how poorly they were on switches on these threes. Like, yes, that was an issue. I really am intrigued, and like we more said our piece last night, Jeremy. So I won't want to get your thoughts, but I left that game with the optimism of, wow, so if this is the Cam Reddish that we now get, and this is just going to lead to Evan Fournier as now Austin Rivers, and his role slowly disappears on this team, there actually could be a decent team that you see the defensive rating get better and better and better, which is honestly Tibbs' calling card. And as long as the team doesn't set their franchise record in threes on the night, this might actually be a watchable next several weeks of basketball, you know?
Yeah, listen, I want to give credit to Tibbs for the lineup combinations he had in the Sixers game. I do. It's just tough for me, not because of giving credit, but because of the fact that it feels like he had to dig down deep because Mitch got hurt.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And that, I think, is it was nice to see him do a better job on the fly, because we've seen, especially in-game adjustments have been poor. It's more that it's like, I'm not going to go with Jericho Sims in this. The Sixers are also playing smaller, so I'm going to also go play smaller. That sort of mindset. And I'm glad it worked out. And then we saw the Celtics game as well. And they also had to go smaller because they were missing Robert Williams due to injury. They were missing Al Horford due to injury. Danilo Gallinari is out for the season. They don't have the requisite size that they need. And it didn't, the Obi and Randall combination didn't work quite as well as it did the night prior. And a big part of that was because Obi's offensive firepower was so good in the Philly game. And then in the Boston game, he really didn't score until the fourth quarter?
Fourth quarter, he had 2 nice moves and a 3. Yeah.
Right. And John, you mentioned about how the paint, it was so porous defensively for the Celtics. And on those 2 shots that Obi had at the rim, he just cut through the defense. It was like a knife going through warm butter. So it's
knife going through butter.
Yeah.
If the butter's warm,
it goes everywhere. It spills out. But kind of like how I felt after the Celtics hit 27 threes. And that to me was a little problematic, obviously. Like we could say that's just Tibbs' scheme. And that's true. It is his scheme. But I also don't know if it is necessarily the best one. I think that's more of like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, where if you feel like, hey, I want the Knicks to do everything they can to lock down the paint, and if they give up threes, then at least we made them try, fine. Or if it's, look, this is a game where threes reign, and that's why these leads get chipped away. And the fact is that the Knicks do let up all these threes. And we've seen all these games in which the Knicks have seen opponents come clawing their way back from giant deficits because they've gotten plenty of opportunities from 3 and they've connected on them. Then I think it's the other way. It's surprising me because last year, it's a make or miss league. We talk about this all the time. Entering today, the Knicks were 29th in frequency for 3-pointers allowed. Obviously very bad. And they were 14th in accuracy of those 3-pointers made. Last year, they were 28th in terms of the frequency for threes, but they were 4th in terms of accuracy. So again,
opponent's accuracy.
Opponent's correct. Yeah. Yes. But what is interesting as well is we do talk about the Knicks in terms of their offense. And it surprises me that the Knicks are essentially a bottom 5 team in terms of their 3-point frequency on offense, when they have added I don't know if I would say they've added more spacing, but they certainly haven't added less. It feels like, Brunson isn't going to be your huge 3-point range shooter. And Hartenstein's not going to be this lights out shooter either, especially when you're swapping out Kemba and Noel. They're trade-offs for all these different things, but at least Kemba was shooting. He's seemed better shooter from three. But it didn't feel like the switch off was that significant. And I know the Knicks have been missing Grimes for the most part, but it's surprising that the offense is not taking a step forward with a better point guard, and there are fewer threes being shot. Well, the Knicks are driving a ton. Last thing I'll say, driving a ton, which is fantastic. They're second in the NBA in drives, but they're just not passing out of drives. I think of the top 15 teams in drives per game, the Knicks are 8th in terms of pass percentage. So creating more of the drive and kick opportunities and finding the open man. That's the one thing the Celtics did that was so flawless. They kept finding the open man. And yes, schematically, it was because there were a lot of open men due to the fact that the Knicks were not guarding against the 3-point line. But it always seemed like the team that went to the NBA Finals that has a superstar in Jason Tatum and an incredible star in Jaylen Brown and some really good talent, they have the synergy, but they also just simply know when to find the right shot. And I just offensively don't think the Knicks have that in them. And I think that lays across the board in terms of why it is problematic.
Andrew, you want to say anything? I've a little pushback on that.
Well, so it's a pushback. Them driving and not kicking is a player execution issue more than it is a coaching issue for me, as far as that's concerned.
I don't know if it entirely is though.
But
because
how
Tibbs
many times have we yelled RJ Obi's wide open on his drives? Like
it's not just him, but
right. It's a
RJ and Brunson, they both need to do a better job. Of course, 100%.
Right. Go ahead, John. Also, the Jets are 6-3. Go ahead.
For how many years did we make fun of the Knicks for being the only team in the league that didn't get the memo about, hey, 18-footers are bad? There are 3 teams in basketball that shoot a lower percentage of long twos now than the Knicks. 3. They are 8th in percentage of shots at the rim, 4th in percentage of shots from the short mid-range. And shout out to Fred Katz, wrote a great article a few weeks ago on how the Knicks have gone out of their way to get guys who can make that specific shot. They're 4th in that percentage. And they're not taking a ton of threes, but they are 14th in the percentage of their shot profile that is corner threes. The issue with the Knicks this year is that they've not been able to make threes. They are 25th or 26th or whatever it is in the league in 3-point percentage, which a big issue going into last night was Julius Randle and to a certain extent RJ Barrett. If your 2 highest usage guys combine through 8 or 9 games, whatever it is, to shoot 20 or 23 or 25% from deep, that's a massive problem. Which again, it always comes back to Randle. So I would give them a bit of a pass on the offense. And the other thing, and again, it all comes together because the one thing you didn't mention about Philly on Friday night took the man until 6.5 minutes left in the game. 6.5 minutes left in the game, put Cam Reddish back in. When it was obvious to anybody who was watching, Cam Reddish needs to be in that game earlier and do what he was doing in the first half, which was very positive stuff. One thing, guess what the Knicks are out. Oh, you probably know because you probably looked this up. Knicks net rating this year in the minutes that Cam Reddish has played.
Actually, I haven't looked this one up.
Take a guess at what their net rating is.
When he has not played.
Insane, but it's
when Cam has not played.
When Cam has played. When he has played. Court.
Net rating plus 3?
Plus 6.5.
Okay.
The Knicks are scoring at a rate of 117.7 points per 100 possessions, giving up 111.2. Considering the team as a whole is negative 1.8 with a 111 offense and a 112.8 defense. That's pretty impressive. Also, this is a guy that we thought wouldn't get any minutes in the rotation. And whether it's because of pushing from the front office or Tibbs just being like, hey, I'm going to give the kid a shot. He's played 181 minutes. I'm giving him all the shit in the world for not getting him in there until 6.5 minute mark of the game on Friday night. It was egregious. They almost lost the game because of it. But he has given him a chance and Cam has thrived. The flip side of that coin is the reason why it took Cam so long to get into the game is someone else was in the game instead of Cam Reddish. That player was Evan Fournier. Can we talk about Evan Fournier for a second, Jeremy Cohen?
Yes. I just want to add one thing. I know I'm being critical of Tibbs, but I'm being critical of the offense, the players on the court as well. But the Knicks were 7th in frequency in threes attempted last year.
Yeah.
And they're this year 26th. They're 23rd.
Because they're taking a ton of shots
23rd.
In close range because they have Jalen Brunson now.
I understand. But you'd also think if they were pushing the pace more, which it seems that they are, whether or not then able to have more possessions and more three. But yes, let's talk about Evan Fournier.
So yeah, make that noise again. So with Evan Fournier off the court, this gets even better. With Evan Fournier off the court this season, the Knicks are, hold on, I have it right here. Yes, the Knicks are outscoring teams by 8.7 points per 100 possessions. Their defensive rating without Evan Fournier is 105.3. That would be a top 3 number, I believe, with a pretty good offensive rating of 114.0. When Evan is on the court, that's a big old minus 13.0 in 196 minutes. 105.3 offense, 118.4 points per 100 possessions given up on the defensive end. My God, what an atrocity against humanity this player has been through the 196 minutes he has played. So our final overreaction, underreaction. Do you think the reactions to Cam on the positive side and Evan on the negative side have been overreactions or proper reactions?
I'm going to say for Cam, proper reactions. And then I'm going to say for Fournier, Andrew, I'm going under.
I'm going to go.
What you say.
wow.
I'm going under reaction. John can't tell me those stats and then I not go under reaction. Let's start with Fournier. As you were saying, this is not the player who was there last year. This is someone who just looks like a shell of himself. Someone who was involved in trade talks an entire season long. And fans tell other players that they wanted, like talking to Quentin Grimes or like get Evan Fournier hurt on Twitter. Like this man's morale, it seems from the outside looking in, does not feel right. And I don't blame him, but at the same time, it is a business. This stuff does happen. And it's funny because the bulk of the conversation going into the offseason when it came to at the start of this season, there were lingering thoughts of how is it going to affect RJ Barrett, knowing that he was in trade talks? How's it going to affect Emmanuel Quickly, Obi Toppin, all these guys? Yeah. We never once said, how is it going to affect Evan Fournier, who by this point is a 10, 11-year pro. And
he talked about it he's the only one who addressed it dead on in the preseason. He was like, "Oh, I'm used to, I've been in the league for how many years it happens. It's part of the business."
Right. And yet it's not working. Something's not clicking here. So, I mean, with Cam, again, it's really nice to see him develop into this player, because the great thing about Cam is that he's not the 10th overall pick. He is essentially the pick that the Knicks used to acquire him, which was far worse than, if we're talking about the Hornets pick, it's likely going to be 2 second round picks. If we're talking about the pick that it was traded for, it was what, the 19th pick in the 2021 draft.
It was the 19th,
where they took Kai Jones. And if you can get a rotation piece at 19, then you're doing something right. And if you can get a rotation piece for the cost of 2 second round picks, then you're really doing something right. I think the nice thing about Cam is he can just be himself. And we don't necessarily have to have conversations about is he going to be salary filler in a trade, or because I know that's something that you and I have talked about and we both been on the same page about. Yeah. So it's great to think that this ideal player who helps lift the defense up and can hopefully do something more with his shot. So he feels like less of a bench piece and more of a starting material who just happens to come off the bench, if that is how the Knicks decide to play.
Talking about Cam now. Out. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Then that's great. But yeah, the shift back to Evan, it's just it's almost funny in that the situation that the Knicks are dealing with reminds me of what the Wizards were dealing with last year, which was you have 2 players on your team making a good chunk of money, Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Mm-hmm. And you have Dinwiddie, who is just inefficient as hell. He's not able to mesh with Bradley Beal. It doesn't look pretty. He signed there for what seemed like a good reason. They needed size at the 1 and they needed a point guard, but it didn't work out. And you got Bertans, who basically then gets stapled to the bench because he can't do anything. And you package the 2 of them together for Kristaps Porzingis. And listen, am I suggesting Evan Fournier and Julius Randle for Gordon Hayward? Not necessarily. Do I think that there's an iteration of a 3-team deal where you could work something out there? Yeah, maybe, although a lot of that depends on Miles Bridges. And that also depends on the NBA suspending him. And it also depends on how the Hornets are going to handle his situation. But it's kind of just that trade opened up time for Denny Avdia and for Rui Hachimura. And it's just been something I've been thinking about.
That's good for that organization. It's for where they are. They need to see what they have in those players before they are eligible for extensions, which good transition to Obi and Emmanuel Quickly are both extension eligible. And look, I don't think Evan Fournier is going to play any minutes on this team when Quentin Grimes is back healthy. So I think if there's a trade out there where they could use a salary, there's a trade out there that they could use a salary. I'm going to go with you. I think it's underreacting to just how bad he's been. As for Cam, definite proper reaction. And I'm tempted to even go underreaction there. I think they might have something here. And I got a little bit overly excited after the Memphis game. I did. And came back down to earth, which, okay, it's fine. I want to see more. Watching this guy on defense, for as much as Julius stood out for all the wrong reasons on defense in the Boston game, and again, it wasn't all Julius. Nobody played well on defense. Everybody made mistakes. RJ made some egregious mistakes late. I want to be very clear about that. Brunson, who we all love, made some mistakes. Julius just made by far the most. Cam played really well on defense. A couple of miscommunications. Not sure if he was the one who was out of place or if the person he was on the other end of the switch was out of place. But man, does he make an impact on that end of the floor. I have confidence in him as an ancillary offensive piece. And yeah, he needs to play, and I'm excited to see what he could do. But I think before we give out our game balls, I will just go back to this. They might trade Evan Fournier. You know, they're not trading Julius Randle. Not right now, or not anytime soon.
I would be surprised.
And
truth be told,
whatever conversations we have, I just have a funny feeling about Thibodeau moving forward. I feel like we're going to continue to be able to relate those conversations back to Julius Randle because they have everything to do with Obi Toppin and Obi Toppin's minutes, and whether or not there should be more accountability for Julius Randle, and whether those two should play together, and how feasible that is, and how is Julius defending, and is Julius shooting, and all of these things. They're so intertwined with the success of the team and all of the other things that people care about, and Tibbs' job. So, God, what a depressing way to end this part of the conversation. As Julius goes, so go the Knicks. But I think that's you, Andrew. You're disagreeing.
I'm just again #45 wins. Listen, Jeremy's right. Only circumstance created the lineups that we finally saw him try on Friday. But we saw this team take a leap in 2021, the We Here season, and they finally stopped playing Austin Rivers because there was clearly like a limitation he had on defense. And unless they were playing the Jazz, a limitation he had on offense. Yeah. I think now that Grimes is back, and like you said, the thing they just discovered in Cam Reddish over the last, honestly, this season, and good on him for turning himself into this kind of player. This changes things, at least as far as what I want to see. I'm actually curious to see, does Reddish become the starting two? Do they play him, mix and match him in other lineups as a 2, 3, or a 4? Do they go with multiple wings going forward? I don't know if it's necessarily Julius. You are right. If Julius goes, so do the Knicks. I do think there are other looks that this team can give teams now because you have a player like this that could potentially add more value to also the Jets are 6-3.
I'll say this. For as much as he did not play a perfect offensive game, and I don't care about missed shots. I never care about missed shots with Julius. It's about the decision-making and the process. He was atrocious for the first half and the first 3 quarters in Philly, but much better against Boston. I'll take that on offense. And the Knicks will be very good on it. There will be a good team if Julius Randle plays the game that he played on Saturday night. And that is even with the defense, because they're not playing that team most of the time. And I think they'll figure out some other things. All right, let's give out some game balls and detention real quick before we do predictions. Jeremy, who's your game ball go to?
Read the candidates.
Cam Reddish, Tom Thibodeau. You're being funny, Andrew. Obi Toppin, Jalen Brunson, Dusty Baker, Edwin Diaz. It's a lot of money, my God. And the goddamn New York Jets, baby.
Who are 6-3.
I would give it to Dusty Baker, who's the only person, well, him and Trey Mann Sr., the only two people I was happy to see winning a ring. But all right. I'm gonna start with an honorary shout out to one RJ Barrett.
Okay.
I'm not gonna take 2 names from you. I knew you were gonna. John, I knew you were gonna take RJ, but in the sense of like his first 5 games, he had an effective field goal percentage of 40%, and then over the last 4, he's had an effective field goal percentage of 61%. So 3 of those 4 were played this past week. He's been doing a really nice job outside of the turnovers in the Boston game. Thought he was fantastic. Feels like something's starting to hopefully click. But I'm going to go with Obi because there's no stopping Obi Toppin. And it's just that Philly game was fantastic. And I know, again, he wasn't great in the 3rd game. He wasn't great with the Celtics game until the 4th quarter where he started to really percolate. But it's nice to see a top 10 pick perform on this team. Not just perform, but given the opportunity to do so. And I'm just happy about it. But Jalen Brunson had a great week. So I'm just going to go rogue this time and go Obi.
Yes, RJ over 50% or at least 50% from the field with at least 15 field goal attempts in consecutive games for the first time in over a year. So nice job by him. I already shouted out Cam Reddish, so I'm going to give it to Jalen Brunson for the simple reason that I think if Jalen Brunson was not on this basketball team, they would be 1-8. So good job coming to New York, Jalen Brunson. Detention. Andrew, you want to? How should we do this one?
Listen, we all know what happened in Brooklyn this week. I wasn't there because I was off last Sunday. Shout out associate AGM JP. Yes, AGM as in associate producer John Macri. Shout out to Justin. But I co-sign everything that was said at the end of the pod last week from Jon and Jeremy regarding the words that were promoted by one former, suspended point guard of the Brooklyn Nets. I just think it's appropriate if we'd like to, in support of Jeremy and of Benji and of Jessica and hey, my mom, if we just put Kyrie in detention and that's our group detention this week, or pick one, Fournier quickly.
No, here's what I want to say. I will root for Evan Fournier. I root for 12 Evan Fourniers on my basketball team any day of the week, happily, before I ever have to root for Kyrie Irving. And people like that should not have a platform. And I'm happy the Nets did something. And I guess the ball's in his court now. But his platform is detrimental to the safety and sanctity of like everything. So hopefully he doesn't have it anymore. And I think there's a chance maybe he won't, which would be great. And that is why he's in detention.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I co-sign it. Obviously, I think also just from what I've seen, a lot of the, what about XYZ? Like, yeah, all of that is problematic.
Bad too. Yeah.
Agreed. Amazon shouldn't have it on the platform. That's true. We also should look at what's going on with Kyrie Irving. You could say he didn't promote it. You can look at the Google Analytics that indicate he made people aware of it that did not know it. And we can look at the fact that it was number one on Amazon or the top list for Amazon for book and movie. And we can say, yeah, that probably wouldn't happen without Kyrie publicizing it. So, yeah, I didn't care about the apology because if he wanted to apologize, he would have apologized. So
we know why
we know why. Sure.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I cannot in good conscience give Emmanuel Quickley detention because while the scoring was not there, I thought he was an absolute beast, especially in the boards against the Hawks. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to do that. So this is going to be a little unfair because he's just working his way back, but I'm going to give it to Quentin Grimes. Again,
no,
not deserving. It's not deserving, but Jeremy, I'm going to say a name.
Group show. We're all putting Kyrie in.
We're all putting Kyrie in.
All right, I thought you just said Evan Fournier. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'd rather watch. I would rather watch.
Go ahead, but I'm saying as a show.
As a show, yes. I would rather watch Quentin Grimes miss every shot he takes for the next 25 games than have to deal with one Kyrie Irving for one game. Guys, in the vein of what Jon said.
Guys, first of all, the Jets are 6-3, and I would rather watch Evan Fournier guard the Boston Celtics, setting record-setting threes, all 5 of them, like 5 Evan Fourniers, than the scenario we're painting. I've always pushed back when we went too hard at Kyrie because I was like, you know what, it's a hot button issue. He does have some good. No, this is dangerous. What this last 2 weeks were, and I'm not afraid to say it. I hope he never plays another game of basketball for a sport that I really enjoy and really love again. Okay. That's the note that this segment should end on. Also, the Jets are 6-3.
On that note, okay, moving on to predictions sponsored by our very good friends at WinBet. Download the WinBet app or visit www.winbet.com. That's WYNNBET.com to start winning. If you sign up today, you receive a special offer. Bet $100, win $100. Download Bet Win. Jeremy, I mean, I hope you've been taking your predictions to the bank and betting some money lines, because you just keep on rolling. You are 2-0. I am 0-2. You keep nailing these weeks. This I think will be a week we look back on in predictions, because there's a chance for this is a very unpredictable week, I think, and I'm very curious to see which way you go. And as we've seen predictions over the last couple of years, the key is to get it back where you're picking first. And I think you're in a tough spot here. You don't want to give me that opportunity, Jeremy. You don't want to give it to me.
I don't. I think you know which direction I'm going to go in for this one.
I think I know which direction you're going to go too, but
yeah, which direction I'm going to go to? Yes, 2-2. That was, yeah. Now, listen, I certainly hope that one of those wins comes on November 13th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But yeah, I think 2-2 feels like a safe hedge. So that's where I'm going.
I think 1-3 is in play. That said, if I had to pick, I'm not sure I would have gotten 2-2.
That's fair.
I think maybe this is Tibbs' last stand. I don't know. I think they're going to go 3-1. I say it with my whole chest. 3-1, baby. Here we come.
All right. Yeah. I thought the Ewing theory with Gobert, perhaps the KD wanting to take back whatever claim he has over New York, as small as it may be. And the Thunder
are playing.
We saw the Thunder play well, and we saw what happened at the Garden last year.
But they're playing. Thunder playing very well right now. So that's a tough one. All right, that's it. I think. Andrew, anything else from you?
Just quick announcement from Producer's Corner. So for those that remember our event last year at MSG, where we had a KFS at MSG night, it was a Wednesday against the Magic. We intended to do that this year and open it to the public. We, as promised last year, we opened it to our patrons first, and then we would open it to the public. And when we opened it to our event this year to the patrons first, it sold out almost immediately. And we appreciate our patrons. If you'd like to get on board, you get a ton of extra content that we're providing, watch parties, a Discord channel, an extra podcast every week. We do town halls once a month, which are outstanding. Shout out Frank from Patreon, who has started the Kevin Durant to Brooklyn conspiracy, Kevin Durant to the Knicks conspiracy theory. I'm not even going to try and break your brain with that, Jeremy. So our next KFS at MSG game event is this Sunday, as Jeremy mentioned, against the Oklahoma City Thunder. We will be there with 45 of our patrons, or a bunch of our patrons. I'm not sure exact number. But afterwards, because we do want to hang out with you, the Jets, who are 6-3, are on a bye, but there are other football teams playing. So we'll be headed to Pennsylvania 6, which is a local bar near Madison Square Garden. It is on, guys, help me with the address.
I think it is 31st between 6th and 7th.
Yes, we'll be heading over there as a group. You can look up the address. We'll also be doing some public publicity toward the event this week and promotion to kind of push people there. As soon as the Knicks game is over, we'll be heading there to just hang out after the game is done and just watching football, talking about the game, talking about the Knicks, talking about the NBA. So come hang out with us this Sunday at Penn 6 after the Knicks game, hopefully after a Knicks W and a successful week. Also,
and a 3-1 week.
Hopefully a 3-1. Listen, hopefully a 4-0 week.
4-0 week. Wouldn't that be something?
What's better than the 4-0 week is a 6-3 season. So the last thing from me, JETS, Jets. Shout out to New York, one of New York's football team that defeated almost Canada today, 20-17.
This reminds me of how happy you were about the local baseball team.
What?
Nothing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning into another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Andrew. This was fun. I hope we have. I hope they can get on a roll here. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I hope they can, because it would be fun to talk about some good basketball. They have some good players, and they could do it. But we'll see if things come together. All right. Until our next episode, which will be a post-game drop-in, pre-game and post-game for the Minnesota Timberwolves game, and then our usual run of shows the rest of the week. Hope to see everybody next Sunday. We'll talk to you soon. Peace out.